From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
What about the saucy edition of the Chris Kenny program you've just seen? Thank you, great man. See you again very shortly. See you, of course, this time tomorrow night. Now, in a second, I'm going to talk about something that genuinely worries me about Joe Biden in the Middle East right now. But first, let's go back to the nothing to see here Prime Minister. The bloke who's still strutting around in question time like he is the bee's knees, despite the fact that, as you know, as you voted, he's the one who put the country through the past many months of division and carrying on, and now all the sooking about racism and all the rest of it. Well, interestingly, the nothing to see here approach that I talked about on last night's show, and we know the PMO is watching this program, don't we? Oh, well. Well, he addressed Labor MPs in the past couple of days, and his message, according to the great Phil Curry in the Australian Financial Review, is this. This is the message to the people whose electorates voted 65% against what their local MP was demanding and what the Prime Minister was trying to play for when it comes to the history books. Anthony Albanese has counselled Labor MPs who experienced strong no votes in their electorates on Saturday to talk up the government's domestic policy. You know, nothing to see here. Look at all this other great stuff we've been doing rather than that $450 million waste of everyone's time and money in order to reconnect with their constituents. These include the release of, now again, he could be talking about a cut in fuel taxes, but no. I mean, this is going to win over the suburbs of Australia, isn't it? This is how Labor MPs can reconnect. Well, you can talk about the employment white paper. You can talk about the urgent care clinics. You can talk about the passing of legislation for a future fund, the housing fund, spending $3 billion on social housing, delivering a budget surplus, the same budget surplus that, remember, was built off the Australian people, 10 million of them having $1,500 taken off them. Yeah, good luck with these writing orders. And even suggesting that the release of the Australian journalist Cheng Lei from China would be a reason for them to magically forget that this government was focused on nothing but the voice in certainly the past few months. And there's some more evidence for that I'll get to in a second. But OK, rather than the writing orders that these Labor MPs are getting from a Prime Minister who's desperately trying to pretend there's nothing to say, nothing burning behind me here, nothing to see. How are things going under Anthony Albanese? Why may the suburbs of Australia not quite be willing to give him everything that he wants? Well, let's have a look. All of these facts, we can show you all the sources. 11 interest rate rises since he became Prime Minister. Record high petrol prices. Yet despite the fact that he's going to tell people, go and talk about a budget surplus, he won't spend $1 of that surplus on relieving the petrol prices, which he could, $3 billion for 6 months for it to go down by 25 cents, but nothing to see here. Power prices. Remember the promise of $275 by 2025? Well, we all know that is through the roof. That ain't happening. Inflation, which of course hit near record highs or certainly generational highs. And even though they want to say, well, it's coming down and it's getting better than what it was, it's still higher than what it was when he was first hired for the job. Higher inflation, of course, means everything costs more. But among other things, the very dollar that you have doesn't go as far. In fact, if you have a look at the Aussie dollar today, it is now in the low 60 US cents. Now, for exporters, that's great because the money works better for them. But for importers, and remember, Australia imports virtually everything. We don't make copy paper anymore. We don't make fridges here. We don't make clothes and shoes. Largely all of this stuff gets imported into our shops, which means the people who are importing it have to pay more because the Aussie dollar is lower by about 10 cents than when this bloke first took over. So everything continues to cost more. And now even the things that were apparently starting to come down will keep going up because the cost of getting them into the country, a world of pain. And remember, this is the same bloke who took $1,500 out of the tax returns of 10 million workers. So once again, interest rates, 11 of them since he became the Prime Minister. Petrol prices through the roof, but he won't cut them. Higher inflation, that means everything costs more, and everything that is imported to the country costs way more because the Aussie dollar is down by 10%, 10 cents since he became Prime Minister, and you got $1,500 less to pay for it. They're changing superannuation, yes, for people with $3 million in their accounts. But remember, if you fiddle with super, you fiddle with people's retirement. He, of course, promised that he was going to have 24/7 nurses in every aged care centre in the country by October. Well, guess what? Mid-October has not happened. He promised a more transparent government. This one is more secretive than the last. You have to literally pay $1,400 for a chance to have a look at the Prime Minister's diary, of which most of it's blacked out. There are thousands of questions literally that have not been answered in the Senate, and even when documents are released to the Senate, like Jim Chalmers about Qatar Airlines. And by the way, isn't it interesting? Qatar landed people back from the Middle East and Australia before Qantas did. It's all blacked out. He's trying to censor the internet right now with the misinformation laws, deciding what you can and can't see. And he spent $450 million on a referendum that everyone knew for months was cooked. Go through the list again. 11 interest rate rises, record high petrol prices, power prices that are way up, inflation up, Aussie dollar down, $1,500 out of your pocket for 10 million workers, superannuation taxes up, a failure to deliver on the aged care nurses, a more secretive, not transparent government. He's trying to censor the internet. And he spent $450 million on a voice referendum so he could cry in the dirt of Uluru. And then there's the garbage that's being fed to us by Grim Jim, the treasurer. He's offsided, the bloke sitting in the sidecar giggling away as they drive the joint off a cliff. Yet they think that, you just go back and tell everyone about our Housing Future Fund. Really? The extreme bulk of people are completely on their own with this government. And Jim Chalmers is constantly trying to say that, well, OK, yeah, sure, the Prime Minister was off, in the dirt of Uluru, being a better human being than 60% of the country who disagreed with him on the weekend. It's almost up to 61% now, by the way. I'll give you those numbers in a second. He's been saying that he's been working all day, every day on the economy. Geez, what a great job he's doing. 11 interest rate rises?
The cost of living pressures that people are confronting are the number one priority of this government. Substantial cost of living pressure. Our primary focus is on helping Australians with the cost of living support, helping to take some of the edge off cost of living pressures without adding to inflation.
I won't read the list again, but can we put it back up on the screen? The 11 things that have really, or many more than 11 things, multiple things about what is really going on with Albo right now. And just a little bit of BS grease is not going to help when you get to the door frames of the suburbs at the moment. Now, despite the fact that Chalmers says all of those things, guess what? He skipped massive international economic meetings. Why? Because he was campaigning for The Voice. Oh, yeah, they were completely focused on the economy, completely focused. Remember, when there was one interest rate rise, one, in May of 2022, it was because we were in a full-blown cost of living crisis. There's been 11 of them under this mob, and there might likely be another one due in part because of inflation. Inflation that is being heavily affected by petrol prices. Yet they continue to refuse to axe the tax. Good luck. Now, you know that we had Jacinta Price on the show last night. The full interview is up at skynews.com.au, along with a lot of the other great highlights and content of this program. We love this lady. And as we brought you the news as it was breaking last night, that she tried to get the Senate to send a message to the Prime Minister that there should be a royal commission into the sexual abuse of children that are happening in Indigenous communities. We spoke to her on the air about it last night, and that post where she was immediately emotional is still up on our page and is on hers. Please follow her on Facebook.
I just find it just unfathomable still that this has occurred, and the fact that these are Indigenous kids we're talking about. This is the real racism. This is the real racism, where Aboriginal children are left in dysfunctional circumstances because of the stigma of the stolen generation, where we can't even hold a royal commission into the fact that they are victims in this country.
Now, the disgrace. Remember, she was not asking for a royal commission. Here's the piece of legislation. Here's who you should pick. Here's how much it should cost. Here's the terms of reference. Instead, she was saying, after the events of this weekend, 60+% of the country deciding that her way was better than the Albo way. That's what they decided on the weekend, right? No need to spin and muck around with this. Pretty obvious who the leader of the No campaign was and what she said while she was in advocacy of the No campaign. Yet the arrogance of the Labor Party, the Greens, David Pocock, to shoot this lady down, metaphorically of course, in the Senate was a disgrace. They wouldn't even let her pass a motion demanding something, because she must pay a price. Jacinta must pay a price for denying Anthony Albanese and all those other people their place in history, while she cares only about the forgotten many in regional Australia. And you had New South Wales Senator Tim Ayres saying things like this to her. Can you believe this? Could you imagine if a Liberal politician was doing this to an Indigenous member of the Greens? They'd still be talking about it over on Channel 2. But when it's Labor having a crack at the Conservatives, you can talk like this to the woman that Australia got behind 60% on the weekend.
Always about the politics, never about the solution. And what is this? What is the content?
Order.
What is the content of this contribution and the content
Order.
and the content of the letter really about? Well, it's really about an angry pursuit of the people that they don't like, who didn't agree with them in the recent referendum. So we have the Leader of the Opposition, the angriest man in Australian politics, the most extreme leader of the Liberal and National parties in our history, always looking for an argument, never interested in solutions. He changed his mind more quickly and more often than Kamal.
Order.
At least Kamal's popular.
Seriously, that's the quality of the people that are now trying to punish Jacinta Price because you didn't agree with them on the weekend. Well, we have another example from the debate. And remember, all of this happened in the afternoon. Most of the TV newsers, they'd already decided what they were going to talk about at 6 p.m. Very few of them decided to go back and talk about this tonight, but more of that debate. This one is a Greens senator, Senator Cox. Have a listen to this performance.
This week, hypocritical attempt to talk up another Royal Commission into this issue will just be another segue into the intervention-type approach to demonise First Nations people in this country.
Now, I get it, it's late at night and you've heard so much confronting stuff over the past few days. I will not go back over the detail. But you remember the 2-year-old in Tennant Creek, let alone the stories that Jacinta told us yesterday? You see, people like Labor and the Greens think the conversation is all about what happened 230 years ago. People like Jacinta are all about what should happen tomorrow, next month, next year. But because today, tomorrow and next year is more complicated than discussing what was in the past, she will be punished because 60% of Australia agreed with her. And then what about today, when Pauline Hanson followed this all up today with Penny Wong, the leader of the Senate, the lady who, of course, is just at the moment just beaming. She's the most amazing diplomat in the world. Listen to this, a woman who knows the value of words, being Penny Wong, a diplomat, a foreign minister. The reason she gave for why the Labor Party got together with the Greens and David Pocock to kill even a conversation coming from Jacinta Price about kids in the bush.
Why did your government vote down a motion for a Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in Indigenous communities?
The point you made about why we don't do what Senator Nampijinpa Price demands, or because the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community is broader than a single member of this parliament.
Seriously. So an Indigenous voice in the parliament, irrelevant compared to the ones that they wanted to handpick to give them the advice so they would do only the policy prescriptions that they wanted. The arrogance of these people, from Albo pretending that everyone will just forget what's going on despite all those things that I listed how many times for you, and now these people that are trying to go after a woman who, remember, is emotional because I've seen the conversation she's had with people in places like Alice Springs, and not even in the town of Alice Springs, but a little bit out. they start glassing over with their eyes because she is their last hope. And then she gets to Canberra, like she has before, when she has literally brought victims with her, the media, somewhere else. And now the Parliament turning its back as well. Well, there'll be a petition, and when there is, I'll tell you about it. And while we probably won't get 60% of the country, we'll certainly be able to get many thousands to force them to notice. It is amazing that this government will spend all of its time and energy pretending to be more open and caring, but the reality is that it is a vicious political animal. And Jacinta Price is in its targets, and by extension, the people who believe in her, which is 60% of the country. Unbelievable. For his part, Peter Dutton said this about the disgrace that's been playing out in the past 2 days.
This Prime Minister is a fading light, a flickering light on the hill. He is a flake, and he doesn't have the capacity to show the leadership this country deserves.
Bloody oath. Now, as predicted, the sooking, which already started before the result that you delivered on the weekend, well, it continues yet again. And we're not just talking about what happened when it comes to Western Sydney, and Western Sydney fighting back about the idea that the less educated, well, you know, they're just the less educated, the poorer, dumber people. You know, 60% of the country were the ones who ended up voting no. Well, there's plenty of other examples of the sooking that's around right now, including somebody that used to work for the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd world that says if we deny the role of racism in this referendum, we don't know ourselves. What about the little cartoon that went with it? The Bogan Victor lawnmower tearing up the hearts of Indigenous Australia. Then there's, of course, the senator who was referring to all of this as being about racism and Trumpian politics. God, if I have to hear this again. Every time they lose, it's Trumpian. You watch, it'll be a threat for democracy, because they're just following the path that's been laid out by the Democrats in the US or the more hysterical people on Twitter. If they disagree with you, there's something wrong with you. And if you believe in anyone but them to have total power, then again, the problem is with you. And they'll do everything they can to try to come after you, from denying every one of your legitimate requests to punishing you depending on where you live with a lack of infrastructure, or in the case of regional Australia, renewable energy infrastructure you don't want because it makes their voters feel better in the city. This stuff, well, again, continues here. Paul Bongiorno, the former Channel 10 bloke, well, he's had a couple of cracks here, including, well, among other things, he's had plenty to say, saying that all of this was a grubby and politicised referendum. And we learned today that the bloke who sang this song, of course, the former lead singer of the band Goanna, who sang this song, well, he has handed back his OAM out of shame at Australia following a democracy and voting the way it wanted to for its own reasons about The Voice. He said, among other things today, the following to ABC Radio.
How much longer do we have to wait for justice for Aboriginal people? How much longer do we have to wait to become a decent nation? This is below us. This was not a high point for Australia. This is a very, very low point.
Okay. But of course, will the title still be there? We'll all wait and see. Hand back the medal, but maybe the letters as well. Now, to see the most serious of things that are around today, Joe Biden is currently in Israel. He has met, or he is, as we speak, meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. As he landed, there was many things to see here, and the symbolism, and I'll get into other things in a second, was immediately not just supporting Israel, but literally bear hugging, as you can see here, Benjamin Netanyahu. He also doubled down on the Israeli version of events when it came to what happened at that hospital today. But I've got to say, there's some things that we have to notice about the President of the United States right now that are very different than what we normally do when he gets off a plane. Now, in the past, we've laughed and giggled about just the more embarrassing little moments where he's tripped and fallen, or sandbags, or all the rest of it. We've spoken before about how his team give him special shoes and all the rest of it. But this now is actually serious about the deteriorating man that is the President of the United States. With his actions today, and I'm not talking about just turning up in Israel, but the way in which he decided to turn up in Israel, he will continue to inflame what is already a tinderbox in and around the Middle East. Now, obviously, the atrocities that took place the best part of 10, 11 days ago must be avenged, no question. Hamas must be wiped off the face of the earth. But today was the day when this thing took a whole new angle. The destruction of the hospital that led to hundreds of people dying, of course, has led to an international debate about whom is responsible. The Israelis have produced as much evidence as they think they need to say, wasn't us. Hamas, of course, have turned around and said, well, it was just one of the many 6,000 bombs that have been dropped on us, and people who were in that hospital were people who were told to go there out of shelter. Iran is saying that at any time they could launch preemptive strikes against Israel. Israel is planning to tell people in Gaza, not the people of Hamas, but the people of Palestine, in Gaza, despite the fact that the area is about, half the size of the ACT, get out of the top third, get down to the bottom third, and they're not even able to leave because the gates are locked and Egypt won't even let food and water in that's been cut off by Israel. This is a massive problem that is happening right now, and I'm sorry, Joe Biden does not fill me with an awful lot of confidence that he's going to be the guy who's going to be able to broker something serious here, that he's been able to get the message to Benjamin Netanyahu. Yes, I understand the need to avenge, but for 10 days you've dropped 6,000 missiles. You need to pause, you need to stop. You need to make sure that food, water goes back into the people whose only crime was being born in that part of the world. Now, for his part, Biden, of course, said all of the usual things, including that he supports Israel. But as you see there, he's reading from palm cards. Now, I get how tinderboxy this is, but this is supposed to be the great foreign policy expert. This is the guy who should be able to do it all off his head. Instead, there he is reading the notes written by somebody else. Here's what Biden said tonight.
Americans are grieving with you. They really are. The fact is that Israel, as they respond to these attacks, it seems to me that have to continue to ensure that you have what you need to defend yourselves.
And then a sign of how all over the place this guy is. Apart from the notes that were being shown to the cameras, somebody will zoom those out, and I have no doubt they're not the nuclear codes, but still, forward-facing notes, reading from the notes, not being able to show any physical or verbal or emotional strength, despite the power of his office, to be able to literally stand there and say to Netanyahu, OK, what's the plan? What are you going to do? Back and forth, let's make sure that people who are innocents don't die in all of this while we do the best to get the people who are hostages out of there. Does that look like the guy who can broker that anytime soon? And then, remember, all of this was, of course, for the cameras. He literally landed, he drove to the location of the press conference, and the press conference started. That wasn't after a meeting, that was before a meeting, which will now go on, we expect, for multiple hours. This is Joe Biden, when the stakes couldn't be higher, blathering.
Years ago, I asked the Secretary of State when he and I were working in the Senate to write something for him, and he said, he wrote a line that I think is appropriate. He said, it's not, we lead, not just, well, I won't go into it, I'll wait later.
Seriously. We have laughed at this guy for too long. This is now serious. The stakes couldn't be higher, including for innocent civilians that clearly he does not care about. This, of course, was one of the people who was more than happy to champion the follies of Iraq and going in there back in the early 2000s. He's now a man who has been more than happy to sit there during the Obama administration and watch drone after drone after drone drop bombs all over the place. He was happy for people to fall off the bottom of planes while he was leaving Afghanistan, and 13 of his own soldiers died, as he also left billions of dollars worth of equipment. This is not about Team Red, Team Blue. This is about a bloke who ain't up to it at a time when literally, the stakes could not be higher. And clearly the people around these two leaders know he's not, because this is how the press conference ended. Megyn Kelly about this and a whole lot more tonight on Paul Murray Live.
All we've done is project weakness since he took over inside the Oval. That's all we've done. And weakness has proven extremely provocative and dangerous.
Megyn in a sec, but before then, plenty to fight about and plenty more to discuss with Linda Scott, Bronwyn Bishop and a whole lot more here on Paul Murray Live. The price Albo must pay and his attempt to say nothing to see here. Do I need to read the list again? I'll keep doing it until everyone knows it off by heart. So when one of the MPs comes and says, "Hi, can I make you forget about the voice?" you'll be able to fight back on every single point you possibly can. More in a sec. Well, I've been looking forward to this chat for a few days. Well, one's happy with the result, one is not. Geez, I wonder which one it might be. None other than the wonderful Bronwyn Bishop, who, well, you would know from the start.
I did.
When I'm saying it's 60-40, 70-30, these things, you were certain all the way through. You picked the mood. Linda, you thought the mood was with you. Of course, Linda Scott, councillor in the City of Sydney, you thought the mood was with you. It was for months, then it ended up flipping and turning. I want to ask you both this question here. A lot of focus now seems to be on the other two parts of the statement from the heart, that being treaty, that being Makarrata. Now, both of those things don't require votes. They can all happen in and around the Parliament. Linda Burney was asked about this today. This is what she said.
Is the Minister still committed to treaty and truth-telling?
The request for a voice to Parliament came from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That's why we took it to a referendum. Of course, we respect the result and accept the decision of the Australian people. Our focus has always been on getting better results for Indigenous Australians. I think that's something that we all agree on.
So, let's be clear. Australia absolutely, positively, completely rejected the first of the three things that were there. But by extension, does that mean that the other two fall as well?
Well, let's focus. This is the 26 pages, which I've read. Let's go to the bit that talks about treaty, where it says that, very simply, a treaty could include a proper say in decision-making, the establishment of a truth commission, reparations, a financial settlement such as seeking a percentage of GDP, the resolution of land, water and resources issues, recognition of authority and customary law. The voice was merely a mechanism to have an entity at the federal level with which they thought they could then negotiate. You cannot have a treaty with yourself. We are a single nation. And Makarrata means agreement making, not the rubbish that the Prime Minister went on with today. I mean, Albo the Trot, seriously, all he ever was good at was, "I just want to fight Tories." He is a hopeless leader, now badly damaged, and you watch the knives come out for him.
Yeah, I mean, Linda, again, very obviously, we know what the question was, but we also know what the debate was. We also know what the debate wasn't, and 60% of Australia was very clear about voice. There wasn't anything on a ballot paper about truth and treaty, but it is all interlinked. Do you think that this government in this term can continue on in a path when 1/3, a fairly important part of that third, has been so comprehensively rejected?
Well, look, first and foremost, I think it's important to call out that, of course, the referendum was lost, but that doesn't take away from the fact that many communities, and in particular Indigenous communities, are hurting. I spent Sunday with much of my Indigenous community in Redfern. They're really upset about the result and finding it hard to decipher, and as a result have asked for a week to just recover, rest and process. So I think it is right to, at the very least, allow Indigenous Australians to have a break and regroup and have a think about what they would like government to do for them. This is the whole point. Peter Dutton, when he spoke on Saturday night, spoke about the fact that he was going to go away and design the policy with his parliamentary colleagues and with Senator Nampa Price, the whole point of listening to Indigenous people and having them decide for themselves and support a government that helps them to achieve their objectives is that they should have a say in the first place. And can I say this? Everybody agreed during the referendum campaign that we have to close the gap.
Sure.
Right? If there is not a focus on that, if there's not funding for
Precisely.
that, then that will really be disappointing.
Of course,
That's exactly what Jacinta Price asked for in the Senate.
But that's the thing. Jacinta tried that yesterday.
And the
gets
Labor
turned
Party
around.
and the Greens
it's a
said
victory lap.
absolutely no.
No hacking motions in the Senate.
There is no.
With due respect,
No, I'm
Bronwyn Bishop,
sorry.
are going to create a proper outcome for
Linda,
Indigenous Australians.
it was an absolutely showing how the Labor Party does not care. Look, 278
had millions of hacking motions in the Senate that you ignored.
278,000 people of Aboriginal heritage live in New South Wales.
Yes.
The largest number live in the Central Coast. These are electorates that voted against the proposition. These are people who live in houses with kids, go to school, go to jobs.
From an in Lingiari,
where the real need is, and it is not getting through, is in Lingiari.
21
where
of the
the violence against children happens.
In Lingiari,
where
21 of the 22
Jacinta
remote
Price
polling booths
lives
voted
it
yes.
and knows it better, you or I or Paul or anybody else. She's lived with it. With her family, she knows it.
But our democracy isn't based, and this is one of the many miscalculations about what we've just been through, right? Which is, if the proposition was about saying what does Indigenous Australia want, you can do a plebiscite of Indigenous Australia. Instead, the decision was to try to lock something into the Constitution which opened it up to everyone. And as insightful as which booth and where and which, all the rest of it, right? The reality is, it's 16 million people made their decision. Because we're all connected to the Constitution, and the majority in every state turned around and said no, only exception, of course, being the ACT. So I want to ask here about, say, Linda Burney as well. Now, Linda Burney and her advocacy, she's somebody who is a perfect example of how the electorate can view someone in two very different ways. In her own seat of Barton, she won it on primary vote. 52%, I think, so outright. Didn't need to go to preferences, didn't need the Greens, didn't need some fake independent. She got there on her own that big. But her own electorate turned around and voted by an even bigger margin, no. She would not engage with a debate with Jacinta Price, like any policy area would end up at, say, something like a National Press Club, television or anywhere else. Many of her answers that were handed to her by the Prime Minister's staff landed like a lead balloon. And if you want to actually go back and look at the question time by question time by question time, in and around June, July, August, when this thing started to go from in favour to under, it's a lot of what she had to do all the way through. Prime Minister's not going to go, should she?
Well, clearly she's not going to go. She's not up to the job, but I don't see Albanese sacking her. And from the opposition's point of view, why wouldn't you leave her there? Because she just doesn't perform. But equally, she's also an example of someone who talks about disadvantage. And I listened to her today. There's no disadvantage for Linda Burney, none. But she was asked about the $265 million that had been set aside to go and do something about Aboriginal violence against Aboriginal children. Well, we heard about $1 million going off to this organisation and $18 million off to this organisation. It was the same old story. Lots of money in the funnel, little comes out at the bottom.
Correct.
Because it's the same old people who are sucking up the money and none of it gets to the people in need. That's why the audit is needed, and that's what the voice of Jacinta was all about. She's the new way of thinking. All the old thinking about let's have all these organisations and we'll eat up all the money and crumbs for you. The Aboriginal Land Councils were created by Gough Whitlam, invented by Gough Whitlam. They get enormous amounts of money from mining, but they pick. This family can have some, this family can have some, none for you. So all of that needs to be looked at so that where that need is and that gap is, and there's other gaps too for non-Indigenous people. We need to be looking at that as well. But looking at that gap that we keep talking about, and if you look at the 15 items that are in it, you'll find some are much more important than others.
Yeah, of course.
And violence against kids and beating up of women are right up there in bright lights.
Well,
but until you have an audit, until you know what's happened to all that money, until you know what the need is, and one thing that this referendum has done is it has brought out to the Australian people that it has just been wrongly handled. And that means by all governments up to now.
100%.
But we've put a spotlight on it. Now we need change. And all those people who've got the old socialist ethic about we're up here of the elites and we'll tell you all what to do, let's go and see where the real need is and hear the new voice of hope that comes from Jacinta.
So, Linda, obviously you are not a spokesperson for the Indigenous community of Redfern, but I'm going to ask you, and you can choose not to answer because they're in a period of silence right now. My sense is that there's going to be a greater jump towards the Aboriginal sovereignty movement, to the Lydia Thorpe version of the world, which is that you can't deal with tomorrow until you've dealt with yesterday. In your dealings in the past few days, have you seen people who were all up for the process of that was laid out in front and turning up to all the different events and turning up to all the different commissions, and those people are now speaking in a different fashion than wanting to engage the way that was being put on the table up until last week?
In my experience with my local Indigenous communities, they have never been anything other than incredibly welcoming and humble of us sharing the land that was taken from them. It is, and it has always been the case in my experience with my local Indigenous communities, that they have tried to find a practical, welcoming way forward that shared this beautiful land. And their main focus was not about, carving up profits for one family or another. Their main focus was about ensuring that country was healthy and cared for. I've spoken often about in the City of Sydney when we consulted our Aboriginal advisory group, they helped us design a better city plan because they spoke about the importance of following where the river course went and designing around floodplains. And as a result, all City of Sydney residents, businesses, visitors, all of us benefit from a stronger, better, more wise city plan because of their wisdom. So all those things that Bronwyn's spoken about tonight, that's not my experience with my Indigenous community. I also think there's only one elected representative in this nation that's walked away from a solid promise as part of this process. The Prime Minister committed to taking this to a referendum, and he did that. And he, of course, like we all do, accepts the result. The one person that has made and broken a promise in this debate is Peter Dutton.
That is rubbish.
He has made a commitment that he would hold another referendum about the need for recognition in our Constitution. He's now backtracked on that, as has every other Liberal and National Party member in our Parliament over the course of this week. If anyone's resignation should be considered, surely it is the man who's already broken a promise to the Australian people.
What about the $275 reduction in electricity prices we were going to get? What about addressing the question of...
It's great that you go off on 10,000 other issues.
No, you were talking about broken promises.
How do you deal with the Peter Dutton question? Because Albo's there every single day pretending that Peter Dutton, in an interview, is the same as him spending $450 million on a referendum he knew was dead for months.
Yes. I think you'll find that the statement of Peter Dutton originally was premised on the basis of there being bipartisan support for having a second referendum, which is clearly not going to occur. If you read again this document, it says we do not want a piece of symbolism in the Constitution, we want power. Now, we've had
You're right, Indigenous Australians never asked for his model of referendum, and yet he promised it, and now he's broken his promise.
Right through the entire debate, we debated all three issues: voice, truth-telling and treaty.
Mm-hmm.
And now Albanese won't even answer whether he's going to stand by it.
Well, he's going to wait for the writing orders, doesn't he?
Albanese put all his political capital on the roulette wheel, and he's lost the lot.
Correct.
There is no more political capital. And he's got people who are in his parties who do not want him to be making the decisions for them.
Okay, I've got Megyn Kelly standing by. I've got 30 seconds. I'm going to get in trouble with my team, but let's talk about the good people at Gladstone. Linda, quick shout out to them.
I've just come back from Gladstone. My lovely friend Mayor Matt Burnett, who just ran a magnificent local government Queensland conference this week with the Premier, the Deputy Premier and everybody. But a big shout out to that community. It's the 5-year anniversary of their fires out there, and they've got fires again raging last night and tonight. They've already lost 2 homes. A big shout out and love to Matt Burnett and all that beautiful community up in Gladstone in Queensland. We hope you're safe and we hope those fires are out soon.
Thank you, gang.
I think we should add the man who lost his life at Kempsey.
Yes,
when the fire
absolutely.
came through.
Defending his own home.
Yes.
Absolutely correct. Thank you very much. Strength and love to all the communities that need it right now. There is a lot happening here and around the world. We'll talk about it with Megyn Kelly next. Thank you, ladies. See you again next week. 15 minutes away from the late debate. Our highlight of the week is to talk to the wonderful Megyn Kelly, host of The Megyn Kelly Show. Find it on YouTube. Find it, of course, podcast, Sirius XM if you're in the US. Or you can see her here each and every Wednesday on Paul Murray Live. Megyn, lovely to see you. Who knew that what's been happening in the Middle East could get worse? But it always gets worse. You're on the air today when the first report started to come through that a hospital had been bombed. The Hamas says that it was an Israeli strike, one of the many thousands that have made it there. Israel says no. It was one of the 30% of the rockets that they tried to fire from Gaza into Israel that ended up blowing up the hospital. Look, who is responsible is the story, but the reality is that hundreds of people are now dead.
This is a nightmare. It seems very clear that this was a Hamas rocket. Israel doesn't target hospitals. It doesn't target hospitals. Hamas intentionally puts its headquarters underneath hospitals. And according to the laws of war, you could, FYI, you could still hit the hospital depending on just how many Hamas terrorists you would take out and just how many civilians you would take out. I'm sorry to put it so blatantly, but that is, according to the rules of war, how you do these calculations. Having said that, Israel doesn't do that. They don't do that. But Hamas does misfire rockets all the time. And frankly, Paul, they're not beyond doing it intentionally for the propaganda value and to gin up support against Israel. They're evil. These are devils. Somebody who would murder the children the way they have, tie their hands behind their back, and then shoot them in the head, tie their hands behind the back, and then burn them alive. They're capable of anything. All right. So that's where we have to start from. But the media and the Palestinian Arab world has run with these initial propaganda releases from Hamas that Israel bombed a hospital. Politico, mainstream publication over here, Israel bombed a hospital. I mean, you know that this is what they're going to do. You know that there's at least a 50-50 chance the initial reporting on this kind of thing is going to be wrong. Hold your fire.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you about the evil of Hamas in any way, shape or form. The reality, of course, as well, is that, again, Israel says it's absolutely not the case, but when you've dropped 6,000 bombs, obviously that can be done with absolute precision. Whether one goes into the wrong place or not, we have to get a third party here to tell us what's going on. My supposition is very much with you about the evils of Hamas, but it'll be interesting to see what Biden says about it when he actually turns up, because, you know, let's be honest here, is that, you know, he's going to want to try to go in there to achieve two things. One, he wants to show absolute support for Israel. But two, he has openly said that he wants the innocent people in Gaza to be able to still have food, still have water, still have petrol, because, of course, they aren't Hamas. I never trust Joe Biden, but I tell you what, at a time like this, I'm frightened that it's Joe Biden in the room. What do you think?
I know. Me too. All we've done is project weakness since he took over inside the Oval. That's all we've done. And weakness has proven extremely provocative and dangerous, not just for the United States, but for her allies. You know, what happened in the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan continues to reverberate with lives lost, I believe. I don't believe we would have had a Russian invasion of Ukraine without that disastrous moment in Afghanistan. And I also question whether Hamas would have felt emboldened to do what it just did with America if we had a strong America and a strong president who knew how to lead, or at least in Trump's case, who was erratic enough that they were afraid of him. You know, I'm not saying Trump was some foreign policy genius, but he was erratic enough that he was scary. You know, Germany's Angela Merkel said to our ambassador, "Your guy scares me. I don't know what he's going to do next." And I think, unfortunately, what people know now is exactly what we're going to do, which is probably not much. You know, even in Ukraine, you know, the criticisms over here go at Joe Biden because if you're going to get in, you can't be a little bit pregnant. You know, either go in and give them what they need to defeat Russia, or don't go in. But we're trying to have it both ways, where we're running out of our own ammo, we're depleting our own sources, we're spending billions of dollars, we're fighting a proxy war now with a nuclear power, Russia, and we have no clear strategic objectives, nothing that's obviously achievable. What, like just go back, give it all up, Russia, give it all up? That's not happening. Russia's not losing, so it's really not happening. And now the same thing is happening in Israel, where I just don't know whether Joe Biden has any sort of military might behind his threats that he's actually willing to unleash. And I certainly don't think the American public is in the mood for that.
Just on Trump, one without notice. Yesterday, he said he'd be willing to go to jail to save the country. Now, I thought this was an ad-libbed remark, but I went back and I watched. No, he read it off the teleprompter. Now, either he'd be surprised somebody wrote that in a speech or he meant to say it. He's also got his gag order from one of the judges. He's leading with his chin now, isn't he?
If he goes to jail, it's not to save the country. If he goes to jail, it's because the Democrats are trying to destroy the country. Correct. You know, Trump going to jail doesn't save anything. It will be an absolute travesty. He doesn't belong in jail. This is a joke. And it's not noble of him to go to jail. It's a travesty. It's deeply wrong and immoral. He doesn't belong in jail. Everyone knows that. It's not, he can't reframe it because he is likely to be convicted as like a service to the nation. That's not what's happening, but it doesn't make the prosecution of him any more right. It's deeply wrong. It should stop right now, especially because we need a very full, fair, robust contest for this White House now more than ever. You know, they always say, the Democrats always say, this is the most important election of my lifetime. And really, it's because, you happen to have a black man running for president, right? The most important, because we've got to get this particular man in so I can feel good about myself. This actually might be. America is in a state of decline. Our position as leader of the free world is in a state of decline, but it doesn't have to remain this way.
That's our show. Thank you very much for watching. Back again tomorrow night. Keen to know who you think the winner and loser of the week is. Jump onto all of our socials. Also, shout out to the 200 people on the Central Coast of New South Wales who work for the company that the rest of us know as Sara Lee, the makers of the cakes, all the rest of it. That company has now gone into administration. There is a hope that the thing will be sold. So do yourself, do your country, and do 200 workers a favour and get a Sara Lee product in the next little while, so the administrators will be able to show that there is a product that Australians want to buy. Otherwise, those jobs are going to disappear. We're going to be in Mildura on Sunday. You can always join us. Send me an email, ourtown@skynews.com.au. Here's the late debate with some breaking news.